News brief. No Moda Studios enchanting platformer Gris have sold 300,000 copies in under 3 months, according to the developer. The title launched on December 30th via Switch, Windows, and Mac, and managed to turn a profit after just 1 week on sale. Although we know it had been bringing home the bacon, we did not any exact sales figures until now. To celebrate the milestone, No Moda has released a free update called Gris Undone that lets players browse through a small catalog of unused music and designs. In this 2016 AD Europe session, Bodysoft's Gris presents a post-mortem of the meditative action game Soft Body. Virant outlines the process of developing his wish for and weird prototypes into a game that gradually teaches players how to do something that feels mentally impossible, controlling two things at the same time. It was an insightful talk that's definitely still worth watching, so developers should not miss the opportunity to do so now that it's freely available on the official GD YouTube channel. In addition to this presentation, THEGDC Vault and its accompanying YouTube channel offers numerous other free videos, audio recordings, and slides from many of the recent game developers conference events, and the service offers even more members-only content for GD Vault subscribers. Those who purchased all access passes to recent events, like GD Vault already have full access to GD Vault, and interested parties can apply for the individual subscription via the GD Vault subscription page. Group subscriptions are also available. Game-related schools and development studios who sign up for GD Vault Studio subscriptions can receive access for their entire office accompanied by contacting staff via THEGDC Vault Group subscription page. Finally, current subscribers with access issues can contact GD Vault technical support. Razer and Microsoft are collaborating to release a wireless keyboard and mouse combo designed specifically for the X1. This news comes after Microsoft finally brought mouse and keyboard support to the console last month. Although the new feature seems to only be available to Xbox insiders, it will eventually be opened up to all players. But at an unspecified date, dubbed the Razer Turret, it features a full-size mechanical keyboard with a dedicated desk key that pulls up the X1 dashboard. The mouse is modeled after the Razer Mobile wireless mouse, and can sit on a retractable base that slides out from the keyboard. Predictably, the turret is also compatible with PC, so players can switch back and forth between platforms as they wish. The Razer Turret costs us $250 United States D, and is currently available for pre-order on the Microsoft Store. Like so much in game dev, the decision to use procedural generation in your game is a double-edged sword. While it provides a theoretically unlimited amount of content, user-crafts the advantages of your game being bespoke and handcrafted. The goal, then, is to craft tools that can turn out procedural content in near infinite quantities and configurations while making that content feel as close to homemade as possible. To explore some different approaches to that problem, Gamasutra reached out to a number of devs with experience working with procedural tools and asked about how they felt about different methods of content generation, and how they avoid making procedural content that feels banal and recycled. First and most obvious is the question of why choose procedural content in the first place. For Kid Fox Games, Tang Yang Shot, co-editor of the book Procedural Generation in Video Games, the answer is simple: it's just more interesting. It's a way to build something that even its creator does not fully recognize. Procedural content and handmade content each have their own strengths and weaknesses. To me, the main difference is that I enjoy creating procedural content far more, as a designer, because my creation has more opportunities to surprise me. Far just among of subset games, who utilizes procedural content, both in their breakout hit for us, well as their new title Into the Breach. It's not necessary to exclusively choose one or another, either procedural or handmade. Both approaches to content creation have a place in the game's world, and both can lead to great results if executed well. Moses, speaking as a player of games, I am generally less interested in completely linear games that test, if you can achieve the goals laid forth by a designer exactly how they intended you to play. I am much more interested in exploring dynamic systems that give the player a lot of leeway to express themselves. However, the most compelling games to me often use both procedural and handmade content. The key focus is always to ensure that at the end you have a product that's engaging and fun. Above all other considerations, procedural content, properly deployed, can help with that. You could simulate complex procedural systems that are amazing from a technical perspective, but if they are not aiding in making the game enjoyable, it's kind of a waste. For example, we found that heavily restricting the procedural generated elements was necessary to make Into the Breach battles less frustrating. Instead, we relied on creating simple mechanics that can interact with each other in a variety of interesting and dynamic ways. That solution is a perfect illustration of how bespoke and randomly generated content are not necessarily oppositional, and can actually be used to amplify each other's strengths. Within Into the Breach, we found that the amount of fun you do have with the game was highly dependent on where enemies stood in relation to their environment. If an enemy is in a corner, attacking a building, it's much more likely that you will be unable to neutralize the threat without causing collateral damage to the buildings. Continues more, this feeling of having no potential solution was unacceptable to us, so it became clear that we would need to create environments that would minimize the chances of this happening. The types of problematic terrain configurations was quite varied, so we eventually decided that we could not rely on procedural generation of maps. Instead, we opted to manually design the basic layout of each map and use procedural generation for less important aspects of maps, such as forests and sand locations, as well as elements that were unique to specific missions, such as where key structures were spawned. The result was a lot of variety of maps, while avoiding problematic layouts as much as possible. However, if you play enough, you will likely start recognizing key features. The ABI Hook, an engineered systematic Softworks whose 2016 release Australia leans heavily on procedurally generated elements, agrees that the best results are often produced when procedural and bespoke content is married together. Generally, handmade content allows for a level of polish that is very hard to replicate with an entirely procedural system. Hook says, the goal with procedural content is to provide novelty, but we want some level of familiarity, so the player is not just experiencing chaos. Artists and designers can be extremely convincing, and building procedural systems that can match that level of care and quality can be quite hard. That being said, having procedural systems enables scenarios that would otherwise be impossible. For instance, in the case of Australia, creating varying game planets that provide alternate experiences each playthrough. In generating the landscapes of Australia, Hook and his team use handmade assets as landmarks to break up procedural content and make the whole seem less random and unfamiliar. They treat these handmade pieces as having an area of influence that extends around them into the procedural content and influences it in terms of player experience. For Hook, building procedural tools is not just a way to save labor or reduce the amount of artistic content required to build a game.